Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is episode 67 of my ongoing series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork. The red Krampus sweater can only mean one thing, and that it is Christmas time. Not my favorite holiday, not by a long shot, but every year I write a snowy, cozy story because the rest of the year is full of bleak madness, so this year, however, ladies and gentlemen, I may have just gone too far. I'll let you be the judge, but don't say I didn't warn you. Yes, the title is called Ratty's Christmas Party. This is not a joke. I wrote a story about 3 rats, but let's get more into that when I talk about the artwork. First and foremost, the music, the soundtrack. I thought if I'm going to write a story about 3 rats, I need to have some music that I'm going to enjoy. So I went back to one of my favorite genres, Dungeon Synth, and found an album called Glacial Magic by Svardun. At least I had that. At least I had that to guide me. And also, if you haven't checked out my new book yet, you should totally check it out. A Song for the End of the World. It's a post-apocalyptic tale that is not happy at all, like the story you're about to read or listen to. And it fits in a stocking so perfectly. I'm just kidding. Anyway, let's move on and check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Ratty's Christmas Party. It's by an artist named Andy Welsh from Wales, UK. I told you it was going to be a weird one. I told you it was going to be a lot lighter. Perhaps I went too light. But anyway, let's take a look at what we have here. So we have a very wind in the willows kind of illustration. We have 3 presumably rats, considering Mr. Ratty, I'm guessing, is standing in the doorway. And we have these 2 rats approaching, presumably for Ratty's Christmas party. It's snowing out, looks very cold, windy, and Ratty, he looks particularly snobby, standing there with his head erect, holding a warm cup of something. So I don't know, let's see where this thing goes. I have never written anything like this. I fear it's going to veer into a childlike tale, but let's see where it goes. I mean, considering there's animals, talking animals, they're standing upright, they're dressed like humans. I'm going to make them talk. So Andy, thank you for this artwork. It definitely is going to test my ability to not turn this into a bleak winter tale. So that said, let's see what I came up with. Appearances were everything. So said Ratty, who was rearranging his furniture just like every Christmas, as he was expected to host the annual party, since he had the tallest tree, while the rest of the vermin dwelt in underground hovels. They always showed up in mobs, scurrying about, tracking in snow and mud and who knew what else. Ratty brushed his hands together and coughed on the dust. He surveyed the space and its dozen or more chairs, tables set with food, the roaring fire, and hot chocolate steaming on the stove. Why do I do it? He asked himself, because no one else was there, just as he liked it. Why do we do it? Finn called the model, who had taken the lead, better abled to navigate this blizzard than Finn. What was that? Model asked over his shoulder. Nothing. Well, come on then. We'll be late. Finn rested on a knot of root that hadn't been covered in snow. He breathed hot air into his hands before stuffing them back into his pockets. It's not too late to turn back. I hear Remy's expanded her place. 4 fireplaces set in a circle. No matter where you are, you're nice and warm. Model tucked his gift bag under his arm so he could warm his hands too. We've been doing this for the last 10 seasons. What would he think if no one showed up? Finn held up his hands. Go back then, Model said. Not a bad idea. Finn imagined the heat from those 4 fireplaces, standing in the center of the room, getting hit at all angles. He turned slowly in place like a louse on a spit, cooking himself slow and nice. But he couldn't leave Model behind to deal with Ratty all alone. Ratty. What a name. Finn pictured his snooty face against his will, with that unnatural posture, as if he didn't have a joint in his body, simply made of one elongated bone. Ratty's back was killing him, in the same spot it always did. His spine had never been the same after the fall from installing that second window on the 3rd floor. He'd only done it because it was the window the rest of them could see from the valley. So if it was off, they'd know not to bother him. He always kept it off. But not tonight. The minnows were skinned, hot flesh fogging up the silver platters they lay upon. The hot chocolate was just right. A little too hot now, but the perfect temperature when the mischief arrived. Mischief, Ratty said, rubbing his hunched back. Model waited for Finn to catch up. That third window was visible now, through the iced branches and blistering wind. I thought you were going back, Model said. I'm a glutton for hot chocolate and pretzels, for chestnuts and buttercream sauce. By the mercy of the forest folk, will you let me finish? Model gave a slight bow. Never mind, Finn said and pushed by Model. The clock must be wrong. Ratty got on his toes and knocked on its face. It wobbled, settled, and ticked just like it should. He used the fireplace poker as a cane, because he'd lost his days ago. All this work had muddled his thoughts, placing everything just right, timing everything just right. The tables near the fire, just so, to keep the meat warm. The tables arranged in such a way to facilitate conversation, but leaving enough space to partake in the hors d'oeuvres without seeming rude. Ratty checked the time again. Rude, he said. He sat down by the fire, hoping the heat would loosen up his back muscles. Then he was worried he might not be able to make it to his feet when the guests arrived, and they would be arriving any minute, he was sure of it. So he stood before he got too stiff, then realized the poker had made a charcoal scribble on the floor. He could almost cry if he were capable. On his hands and knees he scrubbed. Twisted back or not, he couldn't let them see his place like this. The messes were for them to make, not him. He never made messes. Finn leaned into a fallen branch he'd been using as a walking stick. Does this hill ever end? Model patted his back. It hasn't ever, dear friend. It's your turn to carry the bag. I can't believe you got him a gift. We got him a gift. I don't want any part of it. Well, the least you could do is take it partly up this hill. Don't worry, I will make sure he doesn't see you with it. I know you have a reputation to maintain. Finn shook his head and took the bag. Of course it was something heavy. I hope you brought him rocks. Near Ratty's front door at the bottom of the twisted oak, Model retrieved the gift bag from Finn and approached the tree. Finn remained behind, allowing Model to have the honors. Finn thought he might bash Ratty over the head with his walking stick if he saw his face right now. The crunch of snow brought Ratty to the door. He stood up straight, painfully so, gritting through the pain, holding his head high. He grabbed the freshest mug of hot chocolate and opened the door. It was Model, holding a bag in his knobby hand, a gift. Merry Christmas, Model said. Merry Christmas, Ratty said. Where are the others? There. Just one. Finn saw he'd been spotted and waved his hand. He wanted nothing more than to stuff his head into snow. But he didn't, instead joining the two at the doorstep. What a pleasant gift, Ratty said. Model beamed until he realized Ratty was referring to Finn's walking stick. Finn shrugged and handed it over. Ratty grabbed another mug. I'm so happy you two could make it. So are we, Finn said. So if you look in the bottom corner, the right corner where the clock is, you can see that I sat here for 21 minutes trying to figure out exactly what I was going to write. Yes, it's very difficult for me to write a cozy, lighthearted tale. And I think the main thing I had to find in this image was conflict, because conflict, as you know, is the core of every story. Without conflict, the story is just a bunch of events that aren't very interesting. So really the only piece of conflict, or at least a hint of conflict I see or saw when I was writing this story, is Ratty himself, the host of the Christmas party. I guess the guy standing in the doorway, just something about his posture, his nose tilted up slightly. He seems very, very proper, kind of an asshole. And so that's where I decided to create the conflict. I was going back with a lot of different, back and forth with a lot of different ideas on what I wanted to do. Was I just telling the story from this moment on? Did I talk about them inside this house? And I think really what I decided to do, and I wasn't sure if it was completely clear from the telling, is that maybe you're not like me, but inevitably I'm kind of a loner. I'm kind of an introverted guy. I don't really go to parties or like to socialize that much, and that includes with my family as well. I love them. I think they're great, but I never really feel the urge to go hang out with them for the holidays. It's kind of funny because when I do, I have a great time. Like it's the dread of doing it. I don't know what it is, but I just don't like the idea, and then I go do it and I'm fine. And so that's what I wanted to create with this story, because I can only imagine a lot of people out there have the same feeling. Like they're in the routine, they're comfortable where they are, and then journeying. My family lives out of town, so I have to go on this short journey to go visit them, sleep in a bed that's not very comfortable. So I think you get what I'm going for. But anyway, that's what I was trying to do here. And this is one of the first, I may have done it in another story, I just can't remember, where I swapped POVs back and forth. Very challenging to do in such a limited word count. And the two POVs I chose were Ratty, who's standing in the doorway, and then our friend Finn, who is in the foreground, the little rat with a walking stick. Those are the two POVs, and I have Model, the one I named, right in the middle of them two. He's kind of caught in the middle, and so that's what I did narratively. Visually, he's in the middle, and narratively, he's in the middle of these two. We know that Finn didn't really want to go hang out at this party. He had some better ideas. The rest of the mice have kind of moved on, and I think that's a little bit of a sad note to the whole thing, even though Ratty doesn't seem like a very pleasant rat to be around. They're kind of doing their own party, their own festivities. But loyal Model, he feels bad, and so he continues on to this party, despite the fact that no one else is coming. There's a little bit of back and forth between Finn and Model, and he finally convinces Finn, not directly, but indirectly. And then, as you know, Ratty, he's kind of a guy, and it's funny because it reminds me of my mom. So on holidays, she tends to make an elaborate spread, turkey, ham, rolls, mashed potatoes, etc., like all this effort, and then just talks about how much work it is and this and that. And we're always like, we can just order food. We don't need anything extravagant. I could literally eat pizza on Christmas, okay? And so I tried, my mom will never watch this video, so it's fine. I kind of was inspired by her to make Ratty. Not that my mom is angry or anyway, she's a very nice lady, but Ratty, he's kind of going about, he's going out of his way to make this party perfect just because he feels obligated, because he thinks everyone else is going to enjoy it, even though we've established he doesn't like company. He doesn't want anybody to come. At least he says that externally. Internally, he feels a little bit different, because why else would he do this every year? So he goes around making everything just right. The hot chocolate, the fire, the tables, the food. And we learn that he has a back. He has a bad back. And that's one element I used in this when it didn't come to me right away, but I started with this posture. And, the first line is appearances were everything, so said Ratty, meaning like he just has to present himself to the world in a certain way, regardless of how he truly is. I decided to make it a little bit ironic by the fact that he has a really bad back and he forces himself into this position. So he's really just grinning through this pain entirely. And later down the road, I don't even know why I didn't notice this right away. Maybe it was my subconscious, but little Finn at the bottom, he's got a walking stick. And I thought, well, what a nice way to bring these two together inadvertently, right? We have a rat with a bad back who has lost his walking stick, and we have a young, spry rat who found a walking stick. And that, in fact, is where we end up at the very end. We have these two rats who don't want anything to do with each other, supposedly. We have Ratty who's having this party he doesn't want to have. We have Finn, who doesn't want to go to this party. And little do they know, they both kind of have a realization moment at the very end. And it's funny because Model is the one who is just kind of the neutral party in this entire thing. With his enthusiasm, with his kindness, with his demeanor, he brings these two together without even knowing himself. And so I can only hope that all three of these rats have an amazing Christmas party in this twisted tree. And this always happens when I start talking about the story. I'm looking at the time lapse of the writing, not so much reading the writing, but looking at the image, and it's funny that I'm saying all this stuff because it wasn't intentional. And I think that's one thing that is really interesting about writing, and I talk about it a lot. It's the subconscious because, I didn't purposely choose to have the rat in the middle be the one narratively between these two, right? I didn't picture them to be opposing forces, and then we had this like magnetic personality in model to bring them two together. And it's just funny how it ended up being that way. I think the first tip off was the gift. He's the only one with a gift, the one in the middle. So I imagine him to be the kind one. But the staging in this, the composition of where these characters are is interesting from a narrative standpoint, like I said, because we have model literally between them. And that wasn't something that was decided. Just as I'm thinking out loud as I talk my way through this part of the video, that's kind of where it ended up to be. And it's interesting that way. Sometimes how stories just seem to find a way. It's really weird. Not that this is anything extraordinary by any stretch. It's about three rats having a Christmas party. But hopefully I added another element, an underlying bit of subtext there to show that, it's good to kind of just put aside our differences. And maybe if we just force ourselves to do something, if we push ourselves into a situation that we may not be very comfortable with, we just might have a good time. And I know this sounds hilarious coming out of my mouth. Anyone who knows me, this is the exact opposite of how I am most of the time. But hey, here it is. Maybe it's the holiday spirit. Christmas is not even my favorite holiday, not even close. Halloween is, of course, you know that already. I wrote 4 stories in the month of Halloween. But this one, if anything, was an amazing challenge for myself. So if you feel like you're in a rut, or if you feel like you're a great writer and you can just write anything, I challenge you. Write, if you're a horror writer, write a cozy Christmas Wind in the Willows rat story. That will definitely give you a challenge. You might stare at the monitor with your fingers not moving at all on the keyboard for a solid 21 minutes. But I think it's good. I think that's what this video series is really about. It's about challenging yourself. Not so much by writing 1,000 words every time. That is definitely a challenge in itself. And I would like to say, I don't know if I've ever said this on these videos, but every week I do this and I sit down to write these stories. I'm filled with dread. I'm filled with like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if the story is going to be any good. It's probably going to be shit. But inevitably, I sit down, I start typing, and something happens. And I think that is one thing that's taught me, that this experiment has taught me the most, is that if you just sit down and do it, something will happen. I feel like if you consume enough books and movies and video games, anything with narrative, comic books, graphic novels, you have story within you. I think it's one of the most primitive parts of us as humans. We're wired for story. And sometimes I think identifying what makes a good story is stuff that we need to learn through our education, and not just reading books and consuming material, but diving deep into craft literature and essentially trying to label what our gut is already telling us. But I'm really glad that I continue this experiment, and I will continue it. Who knows? Until the day I die, we shall see. Maybe I'll have 1,000 stories. Well, my math's wrong. I should have way more than that, because in 2 years I should have over 100 stories. Yeah, so hopefully I live longer than the next 20 years, but we'll see. Anyway, I hope me stumbling through these strange stories, good or bad, helps inspire you to pick up the pen or take on the keyboard, type out some letters, write out some letters that form words, that form a story. Because while this one took me a long time to get through, and it was a painful process, I'm glad I did it. This will be kind of a funny story to end the year with. I'll have a couple more stories, or one more story. What are we at now? Yeah, maybe like one more story, I think, if my math is right. It's probably not. So this won't be the final one, but I like to do seasonal stuff. I did a snowy one last year, and here's my snowy one this year. Trust me, I searched for more interesting snowy images, and I did find some. They were too dark, and I promised you last week that I would not do something bleak and grim. I would do something lighthearted. And as I said when I was talking about the artwork, perhaps I went too far. In any case, I hope you liked it. It was an interesting time. It was a fun time. It was a frustrating time, but you know what? I think I'm going to miss Ratty, Finn, and Model. As much as it pains me to say it. It was fun kind of trudging through the snow with those three, and well, two, and the other one arranging his Christmas party. But yeah, once I got going, you can see that it didn't take me very long. I've only technically been writing for an hour and 10 minutes or so, and I'm gearing toward the end. Hit 1,000, just a little bit of cleanup to get to the end, but yeah, not much longer. So it all worked out in the end. That is the moral of the story. Keep going. Don't give up. I know this sounds like a strange inspirational ad, but I assure you it's not. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. I'm very glad you made it because I know that was probably a difficult thing to sit through. It was quite different than what I normally write. I've never written anthropomorphic animals, if that's the true term. Speaking animals, never in my life have I done that. But I promised you last week that I would write something that is not very bleak, and I don't think there's really anything bleak in this story. Maybe Ratty, he was kind of a little bit of a curmudgeon, but other than that, I think we're pretty much safe. So, what did I learn? What did I like? What didn't I like? Well, if you watch the writing part, you'll know that it took me a good 20 minutes or so to actually begin writing. Yes, this was a very challenging thing for me, and so I think that is what I learned, that it is important to get out of your comfort zone. I tend to write things, or try to write things, that are character driven, that are kind of bleak, that are kind of tragic, bittersweet, however you want to label it. But I suppose every once in a while, doing something the complete opposite of what you're used to doing is a good way to stretch your creative muscles. So I did like that I came up with a story. It actually happened. I was sitting there looking at the screen, the very, very blank screen, wondering if I was going to actually write anything at all. This is going to be a disaster. And then finally it happened. And I like the fact that I did create some kind of conflict, right? I used the three mice in the actual composition, how they stand, to sort of represent how they stood in the narrative. Finn being the one who was reluctant, who was closest to us. Ratty, of course, in the tree. And Model stuck right in between, walking up to this treehouse with a gift in hand. And I did some other things here. I switched POV back and forth between Finn and Ratty. That was something that I usually don't do. I may have done it once before. I don't remember. I've written too many of these damn stories. And I generally don't do many POVs when I write, specifically in a short story, because there's not enough time. You want to get in the head of this person. You want to experience the world through this person's eyes, or in this case, a rat's eyes. But I felt it was important to telegraph what I was trying to do, and that is exemplified by the first line, I think, of the story, which was, appearances were everything. So Ratty, as you know, was trying to appear a certain way. He was this broken old rat who didn't like to have these parties, even though deep down I think he did. And then Finn, of course, who was looking on to greener pastures where all the other rats had created a much more pleasant and cozy atmosphere to host a Christmas party where these rats were used to living, which were down underground. But good old Model, good old optimistic Model, who decided to travel up, as they've done for the last 10 seasons, to visit Ratty, who has been hosting this party for some time. It's funny, as I'm saying this out loud, it sounds so ridiculous. I'm talking about this rat story like there's something to it. But anyway, it is what it is. It is done. I hope you enjoyed it at least a little bit, or maybe you love to hate it. If that is my gift to you, this story, enjoying it or hating it, because if you hate it, you probably like hating things. I'm a little guilty of that sometimes. So I hope everybody out there has a great Christmas. If you celebrate, if not, have a good break, because everyone else is. So you get some time to yourself to maybe write, maybe read, maybe watch a good movie. I know I'm going to be doing all of the above. So on that note, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.